Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Thursday night training. I'm Honey Sagari, founder and CEO of Qyral, aka the Longevity Mom. If you know anything about me, you know that I'm passionate about aging and longevity. In fact, this passion is what led me to start Qyral. Educating all of you on longevity and the latest advancements in the field gets me so excited. Tonight, I'm going to introduce you to a guest who's an expert on the topic herself. We're going to talk about longevity, inflammation, and her experience and thoughts around weight loss drugs, Tirzepatide and Semaglutide. Let me introduce our special guest. Dr. Georgia Braimakis is a doctor of internal medicine who studied at Athens University Medical School in Greece, and her focus has been preventative disease. She also holds master's degrees in biomedical engineering and nanotechnology from Harvard University. Wow, you are an impressive woman, to say the least. Every day in her practice, she sees patients who have conditions linked to metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance. Those things are almost always tied to our weight and ultimately affect our quality of life and lifespan. Dr. Braimakis feels that weight loss can be a key factor in preventing or treating age-related disease. I'm so excited to learn more. Welcome, Dr. Braimakis.
Thank you so much, Hania. It's nice to be here tonight and good to see everyone, at least in our minds, since we don't see them visually. But welcome, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I mentioned that I'm obsessed with aging and longevity. It's something that stems back to my experience growing up and working with the elderly. It's also at the heart and root of everything that we're doing here at Qyral. Can you share with us where your passion and interest in the subject matter came from?
Well, I've been working for many years in preventive medicine, and it was very exciting to me in the last couple of years to see how much progress has been made in longevity specifically, not just preventing disease. Obviously, these two are related, but now longevity has two facets. One of them is we want to prevent or reverse things that shorten our lifespan. However, new research now shows that we can actually actively do things to prolong the lifespan. Even if we're healthy and don't have anything to treat, we're able actually to do that. Today, with lifestyle modifications, there can be a big difference. However, there's also a lot of new research about supplements, as well as new drugs that are actually out there being tested, not available yet, but being tested. And beyond that, of course, there's research on stem cell research, as well as genetic engineering. So that's a little bit down the line. But what I found to be really exciting about this longevity research, we can actually apply that today, and it can make a big difference. And there's studies out there that show that our biological age is actually being reversed. So just to make a distinction, chronological age is how old we are, how many birthdays have we had, and biological age is how old is our body? Does it function like, let's say, if you're 40 years old, does it function like a 40-year-old? Is it more like a 45-year-old or a 35-year-old, or sometimes 25-year-old in some people? So the age, you can see two different individuals of the same age and can be dramatically different. I have patients that, let's say, a 50-year-old can be on no medications at all. And then I have other 50-year-olds, they're on 15, 20 medications for various medical conditions. And all these conditions are related to each other, it seems to me. Short of injuries or some unusual genetic diseases, it's all one disease. It is related to inflammation and insulin resistance, in my experience. And all the research is pointing in that direction. So if we're able to reverse these processes, we reverse these diseases. And this is not just theoretical. Just in the last 2 weeks, I've had 3 patients that were able to reverse their diabetes. They're off diabetes medications, normal hemoglobin A1C, which is a test showing how your blood sugar has been in the last 3 months on average. And one of them came off insulin, which was a very big surprise to me, because once you go on insulin, it means your pancreas is essentially destroyed. However, he was able to get off insulin. He's still on diabetes drugs, but not on injectable insulin. And maybe we can talk about speculation of why he was able to get off the insulin. I think we were talking about it earlier, how we can now regenerate some of the pancreatic tissue with the medications such as Semaglutide and Tirzepatide.
And so aging, I mean, it can ultimately be broken down to the cellular level, and the science seems to have almost been able to pinpoint why it happens. Can you explain to our audience some of the science behind aging, and especially when it comes to inflammation? I mean, you mentioned it, and I keep hearing the word in the longevity research community, inflammation. Can you shed some light on that and talk to us about inflammation and its role in aging?
The science is still not clear exactly why we age and why we even die. Originally, we thought cells die off, and this is what's causing us to die. That's not true. Our cells die constantly, get regenerated, so we don't want cells to live forever. Then some people thought that we're genetically programmed to age and die. That is no longer believed. Now we believe that aging is not an inevitable process. We believe it's a disease, it's a medical condition that we can treat. Now, as far as inflammation is concerned, it's one of the mechanisms through which aging manifests itself. It's not the cause per se. There's underlying causes that cause it, inflammation. However, if we can curb that inflammation, it makes a huge difference. And the other factor for aging is insulin resistance. So let's take it one by one. Inflammation in the skin, everybody will tell you, you age, your skin, you start looking older. If you have certain skin conditions, you age a lot faster. The inflammation we get from the sun ages us a lot faster. And then if we reverse that inflammation, we actually start aging backwards. And retinoids are actually helpful in accomplishing that. Inflammation means damage. We do need inflammation to heal certain things. So if we have an injury or an internal process or an infection, we need that inflammatory process to fix the problem. However, when the inflammation becomes chronic, it just represents damaged tissue. And damaged tissue doesn't live long. It can only regenerate itself so much and to a certain extent. And this is why inflammation is so detrimental. And there's so many different things that cause inflammation. It's the food we eat. For example, oils, vegetable and seed oils, which even I, until a couple of years ago, thought were healthier than butter. Now it turns out they're very, very highly pro-inflammatory. The reason is that they are heated at very high temperatures, so that makes them highly inflammatory. And also they have a very high proportion of omega-3 fatty acids, which are not sufficiently balanced by the omega-3s that everybody knows about, right? So omega-6s and omega-3s are different kinds of fats that we do need. However, we need to have the right balance. So these oils we're talking about, they're very, very high in omega-6s. So people that consume omega-6s in large amounts have very high amounts of inflammation in the heart tissue, in the pancreas, in the skin. So we age more rapidly if we have inflammation in these, and also the brain, very, very importantly, and our nervous system. So inflammation will destroy those tissues. So in every single tissue and system in the body, inflammation, whether it's intrinsic from a genetic cause or what we eat, the pollution, is damaging us. And this is why it's aging us. So aging is just one of the problems. That's probably the least significant one. Inflammation is at the source of clogged arteries and cancer. But clogged arteries, if you have a lot of cholesterol, but you don't have inflammation, that cholesterol cannot sit on the artery and clog it up. So my concern with inflammation is the disease itself, and then the aging is just another bad thing on the side. Same thing.
Fascinating, yeah.
Same thing with insulin resistance. Those that have high levels of insulin resistance, they age a lot faster, similar to the inflammation issue. But if I can just present briefly what insulin resistance is. I don't know if the audience is familiar with that. It's a relatively new concept. So when we eat, our blood sugar goes up in our bloodstream because we absorb it from our stomach and our intestines. So our body produces insulin as a response, specifically the pancreas, to get the glucose into the cell, where it can be burned for energy, or it can be used to build things. We want to build stuff in the cells, right? Create things, build new cells, build new structures. But at some point, when we keep eating constantly, the 3 meals a day, plus snacks, which we've been advised for many years to do, which we no longer recommend, if we constantly keep eating, there's constantly glucose in the bloodstream and the insulin's pushing it into the cell. At some point, the cells have had enough. They say, I can't accommodate anymore. I'm going to turn this into fat. So that's how the obesity issue starts. However, the cells cannot accommodate more than a certain amount of fat. So once the cells are full, the glucose starts floating around in the bloodstream. So we have full-blown diabetes at this point. Then besides the cells under our skin that get fatter, so we all look fat, right? When we gain weight, we start gaining fat around our organs. And this is very, very dangerous fat because that produces hormones and it produces toxic compounds. And this is one of the reasons that those that suffer from obesity have worse health outcomes in general, because of the hormonal and toxic substance production from that fat. So this causes high blood pressure as well, because those hormones that the fat produces, along with the toxic substances, harden the arteries. So now we have high blood pressure. There's the same amount of blood, but the arteries are no longer pliable and soft. They're very stiff. So if you can imagine a plumbing system where you have a rigid pipe, if you put the same amount of volume in the narrow pipe, you're going to get the pressure up. Then that blood pressure, of course, is going to cause heart disease. So we already have the diabetes issue. We got the obesity issue. We have the cholesterol is also going up because all these fats that the cell can no longer accommodate, they float around as well. So we got something that's called metabolic syndrome, that more than 50% of Americans, at least here in the West, up to 2/3 of the population over 65, and 50% of the general population, we suffer from the metabolic syndrome. You will note if somebody has a big belly, especially when it's a tight belly that you can't squish, that means there's a lot of fat around the organs inside the body. You can predict reliably that this person, if you test them, will have higher blood pressure than normal, higher cholesterol, triglycerides, which are a different kind of fat, borderline or high glucose, or even be diabetic. And these conditions can be reversed. As long as, let's say, the heart isn't completely destroyed and they don't have an arterial bypass, you can reverse those. And even for those that have had a bypass or stents in their heart, you can keep them healthy and the disease will not progress anymore. So the beautiful thing now, compared to when I was practicing 25 years ago, now we can reverse these things. And drugs are part of that. So one of the things, for example, with these newer generation drugs like Semaglutide and Tirzepatide, they are much more effective in reversing that insulin resistance 4 times more than the previous drugs that we had, even the more recent ones. So this is huge. And an additional study that came out very recently, actually more than one study, show that these medications, and we don't know the mechanism, can regenerate some of the pancreatic cells that are damaged, which is at the basis of diabetes. So basically what happens, why did we develop diabetes? The pancreas keeps trying to push out insulin to the point that it gets exhausted, and some of the beta cells, as they're called, die off. Now these medications, like Ozempic and Wegovy and all the other ones, Rybelsus and Mounjaro, they can regenerate those cells. And this should not come as a surprise too much, because we have now found in the last couple of years that we have stem cells in all our tissues, no matter how old we are. We thought that only young people, children, had those stem cells. We thought, especially in the nervous system, once you lose your nerve cells in your brain or the spinal cord, it's done. That is not correct anymore. We can regenerate some of these tissues. And apparently now, the medications I just mentioned, they promote that regeneration. We don't know the mechanism yet. So that's very exciting stuff. And hopefully more and more people will benefit from those developments.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that there was a recent article that came out that the drug Wegovy cuts stroke and heart attack risk by 20% amongst, other benefits on biomarkers. Can you touch on that a little bit and tell us more in detail? I mean, you touched on it briefly, but can you share with us in a little bit more detail how exactly it does that? And what does it ultimately mean, right? And when it comes to longevity, because this topic is really about these drugs, Tirzepatide, Semaglutide, GLP-1. I mean, we'll get into the details of their mechanism of action, but can you share with us, since we're on the topic, how it does that?
By the way, I want to say that 20% is astoundingly high, because usually when we talk about a benefit of a drug, we're talking about 5% benefit, then we put somebody on that. The 20% is really huge. So basically, the literature is not clear. I reviewed the literature over the last few weeks, whether it's the weight loss itself that causes those reductions, because let's say if you lose weight, you're going to have a normal blood pressure, you're not going to have diabetes, you're going to have a lower cholesterol. So you're basically cutting your risk down by 80, 90%. Then, of course, if somebody's a smoker or has a very strong genetic predisposition, that's not being affected by the medication. However, if Wegovy in this case, for example, which it does, reverses all these abnormal conditions, then it's natural that the side effects of those conditions of diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol are not going to occur in the same percentages. So that would explain why we have fewer strokes and why we have fewer heart attacks. However, the literature believes that there's a more direct mechanism that is not fully understood, why semaglutide can actually prevent a stroke and prevent heart attacks independently of weight loss. So they think the researchers believe there's a second mechanism or multiple mechanisms where semaglutide has an effect directly, maybe in the brain or in the heart arteries that we cannot explain yet, that maybe an anti-inflammatory or other effects. This is very common in medications. We find many different effects. So sometimes side effects is a neutral concept. So side effects usually are considered negative, but really side effects that are negative are called adverse reactions. We also have positive side effects. And it looks like one of the positive side effects is for semaglutide to further reduce mortality than we would have expected just from the weight loss itself.
Yeah, and how about its relationship with Alzheimer's disease? Can you share with us that?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So most dementia, we thought until a few years ago that it's Alzheimer's, and we believed it was related to certain tangles in the brain, some abnormal proteins and beta amyloid proteins in the brain. We no longer believe that most dementia is due to Alzheimer's. There are some families that have certain genes that run in the family that could predispose to a specific type of dementia. And there's also other types of dementia, Lewy body and others. However, most dementia now is considered to be microvascular dementia, which means the vessels in the brain, the arteries, just like when they get clogged up in a stroke, but less dramatically so. So over the course of many years, little tiny arteries in the brain with the same mechanisms that cause blockage in the arteries of the heart or blockage in the arteries of the brain that cause strokes and heart attacks. The same process of clogged up arteries with cholesterol, calcium, and inflammation that we talked about earlier clogs up the little tiny vessels in our brains. So people don't notice any difference. You need to have thousands of these little arteries get clogged up in one area to start even noticing a difference. Oh, now I'm more forgetful, or I can't do this, I can't do this activity. Why is it happening? So it's the same mechanism. So this microvascular dementia, we can protect against it again by reducing that inflammation, insulin resistance. So it would not be surprising at all to see Wegovy and all these other medications that are similar to Wegovy, GLP-1s and GIPs, prevent the development or worsening of dementia, assuming it's the most common type. I don't think it's going to have much of an effect in Alzheimer's per se, even though somebody who has Alzheimer's could also have additional damage from that microvascular damage, right? So you could still protect an Alzheimer's patient from having additional damage to their brain. But the majority of people that do develop dementia, that would be definitely pertinent, and it could reduce the rates of that disease, the dementia, which is now widespread. It's a rampant.
Yeah. So we touched on this a little bit earlier about sugar and insulin resistance, but can you specifically share with us, sugar's everywhere. I mean, it's in all of our foods. Can you share with us sugar's specific role when it comes to inflammation and cause of inflammation? And how does this relationship affect longevity in the long run?
Well, I can think at least of two relationships with sugar. And interestingly, I got off sugar completely just last September, and I feel a huge difference just in the way I feel. I never get tired, so which is something that I didn't expect, but I felt I can just do anything without ever feeling fatigued if I don't eat sugar. So also I want to say sugar is not just table sugar. It's any carbohydrates that are processed. So it could be sugar. Honey is a different category that has fructose. But if we eat white flour, we're going to have a similar effect as if we have eaten sugar. And in terms of all the artificial sweeteners, I would caution against those. There's been a lot of issues with them. We can get into that at a different point in the conversation if you'd like. So basically with sugar, what happens, what we described early was insulin resistance. if you put sugar in your system, the insulin will spike right away and the sugar is going to get absorbed immediately. If you have a complex carbohydrate where the sugar molecules are connected to each other, it'll take extra time for the stomach and the intestines to break them down. So the absorption of that sugar is not going to happen so quickly. So we're not going to get that effect. But if you eat any simple carbohydrates, as they're called, it's like table sugar, it'll spike. And every time you have a glucose spike, you're going to have an insulin spike, and the insulin resistance will develop. So we already said insulin resistance causes the obesity, and the obesity produces the toxic hormones and other substances that causes inflammation, and inflammation causes damage. So this is the indirect way with which sugar causes that problem. There's another mechanism. There are some substances called AGEs, and this is basically when sugar goes and connects to a protein or fat molecule. So when we barbecue, for example, or when we grill something at a very high temperature, that causes the production of these compounds. Where sugar or caramelizing, we like to caramelize our food because it's very tasty and gets sweet. However, this means when the sugar connects to a protein or a fat, it produces these molecules that cause huge amount of damage. They're oxidative. So imagine, for example, a shiny piece of iron, how it becomes rusty. Think of your tissues in the same way. And this is what these AGEs do. Advanced glycation end products. That's what AGE stands for. So this is another way that sugar causes damage, again, through the process of inflammation. Also, sugar itself doesn't have any nutritional value. So if you eat sugar, you're not going to eat something else, which could have provided you with that nutrition. So that's another indirect mechanism. I mean, if you eat a little bit of sugar occasionally, that's not going to cause any significant problems in somebody's health. But as you mentioned, it's everywhere. So I would say, instead of just looking for foods that don't have glucose or table sugar, just avoid anything that has any processed carbohydrates and limit the amount of carbohydrates. I wouldn't go to any extreme. Like I don't necessarily recommend the ketogenic diet or the very low carbohydrate diet unless there is a medical reason. There are some cases where it can be extremely beneficial, such in some neurological disorders. But in general, I think some carbohydrates are good, but get them from beans, get them from vegetables. All of these foods have carbohydrates. Get them from fruits. Some people don't eat fruit because they say they have carbohydrates. I eat fruit. So I'm actually Mediterranean. So I'm thinking that maybe also my background, I'm evolved to, tolerate these foods. And if you eat fresh food, preferably something that you cook, something that doesn't come out of a package, you're in the right direction. You don't have to worry how many milligrams of sugar does this have or how many micrograms. This is not the way to live. So fresh food with many different colors, vegetables, every color represents a different nutrient and benefit to us. So sugar, if it's processed, so if you have a little sugarcane juice from fresh sugarcane, that's okay. But processed foods, that includes sugar, that includes the oils we're talking about, the vegetables and seed oils, anything processed or packaged, that's what causes inflammation and the insulin resistance, not just sugar itself.
Yeah, I remember, I think the daily intake of these AGs, I mean, we could have a whole segment on AGEs itself, but I think the daily intake should be 15,000 or something like that, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
And it was like, one of the study was like, a cooked piece of chicken, a boiled piece of chicken, it has 8,000, right? Like you can't avoid having AGEs in food. They're there, they exist. However, as soon as you fry that piece of chicken, now you're in like 30,000, 20,000, and you don't eliminate them, right? They kind of aggregate over time.
Stick around. So, stick around.
Bacon, I was like shocked to hear. I think bacon had 80,000 on the scale. Like if your daily intake should be 15,000 and bacon has 80,000. I mean, it's just remarkable the numbers. But
I would like to add also, we should not underestimate the ability of our body to clear out bad stuff. I mean, our body is able to reduce toxins. We don't need to do a detox diet or anything. Our liver is really fantastic at getting rid of substances and converting them into neutral molecules that are not going to harm us. And the kidneys also, to some extent, they also get rid of them, just removing them from the body. However, we have to make sure our liver is healthy. If we have obesity and we have insulin resistance, we have fatty liver, it's called. So fatty liver is not like cirrhosis where the liver is completely damaged, but the liver is not functioning properly when it's fatty liver. Same with alcohol. So the way to do it is, number one, not to damage our body and not to eat things that are damaging, but also to allow everything to be as healthy as possible. So should we eat something bad? And, we're breathing the air every day. There's nothing we can do about that unless you go off the grid completely. Let's have a healthy liver. Let's have a healthy metabolism so it can handle it. And we can handle a lot. We can handle a lot, actually.
Yeah, actually, I want to touch on that because about a year ago, I did a video on Hormesis, and I noticed that you've written quite a bit. You've written extensively on the subject matter. Do you mind sharing with our audience what Hormesis is? And, maybe you could discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, so Hormesis is one of the mechanisms that I love because it's not something that we're doing to avoid something bad, but it's something good we're doing to prolong our life and to be healthier. So Hormesis is a short-term stressor, something that produces a physical stress for a short amount of time. So we find
just going into a sauna, right? Like that's
going into a sauna is one example for a few minutes. Taking a cold shower, taking a cold plunge for a few minutes is one. Doing what's called high intensity interval training, which is a type of exercise where you exercise really fast for 30 seconds, then you slow down for 30 seconds, then you go really fast again for 30 seconds, on and off for about 5 minutes. What happens in those cases? The body gets shocked, right? You would think that's a bad thing. However, it's not. The body says, okay, I'm dealing here with a danger. I need to maximize my performance. So let me get rid of all the bad proteins I have stuck here. Let me get rid of all these zombie cells, as they're called. We have some cells that are just sitting there. They're just taking up resources and they produce toxic molecules, especially when we have all this inflammation around. So the body, when it's presented with this shocking factor, immediately, it's not that it has to start, weeks later. It happens immediately. It starts doing some housekeeping and house cleaning. That's a process called autophagy, by which we get rid of defective proteins and defective cells. So autophagy means self-eating in Greek. The body eats itself, but it eats only the bad parts of itself. And this is a process that exists in us no matter what. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to survive, right? But these sudden stressors, physical stressful factors for short amounts of time, allow our body to activate that autophagy, that self-repair. And then that self-repair stays for hours or days. Even if you go to the sauna today for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or you take a cold plunge or do this high-intensity interval training, that cleaning up that the body's doing at the cellular level will persist for many hours or even days. So hormetic stresses, hormesis just means stressing the body in the short term physically. And this is a concept actually that exists in plants as well. And we can benefit from that. And we can take advantage of that to our, to our benefit. For example, organic foods, for many years, I thought organic foods are great because they don't have pesticides, which obviously is a very, very good thing. But there's an additional reason. When a plant has to fend for itself to fight against predators, or it doesn't have enough nutrients, so it has to spread its roots more, that's a stressor on the plant. So the plants do their own housekeeping. They also clean up all these defective proteins and molecules. But in addition to that, the plants have the ability to produce molecules that will protect the cell or try to fight the predator. And when we eat these, it turns out these are very, very beneficial to us. So an organic food, not only doesn't it have pesticides, and so it's beneficial to us, but it has a much, much higher concentration of beneficial molecules in a conventionally grown food, because that plant that produced that fruit or this whatever we take from that plant had to fend for itself and produce the best of the best that it can produce to protect its life. So one of the examples is sulforaphane. I don't know if anybody has heard about that. Broccoli are the richest source of sulforaphane. It's an anti-aging compound. It is an anti-cancer compound, anti-inflammatory compound. All cruciferous vegetables have it, like besides broccoli, it's Brussels sprouts, it's cauliflower, it's arugula, and many others. So this compound is extremely rich and contained in very, very high amounts in organic cruciferous vegetables. So this is a hormetic stressor, a stress that the plant experiences that leads to an outcome that actually we can benefit from. It's not just beneficial to the plant, but then when we eat that plant that's organic, that had to deal with this hormesis, that stress, we help our health and our longevity. So sulforaphane is tied to longevity in clinical, not in clinical studies in humans, but in animal studies and in the laboratory. It can protect cells.
Well, it's the evening. It's a Thursday evening. I'm sure someone out there has a glass of wine. Your thoughts on wine and the phenols, and maybe you could discuss that and longevity.
Yeah, the issue with wine has been going back and forth a little bit. So for many years, we're recommending to even maybe have a glass of wine per day or even other alcohol. But the resveratrol, obviously in red wine in particular, which is a nutrient that's actually being studied now as a compound for longevity itself, just to isolate it. And you probably know Dr. David Sinclair was very big on that. He promoted resveratrol, and now he's actually taking metformin, even though he's not diabetic, he's taking that anti-diabetic drug. So resveratrol is supposed to be, it is actually existing in high amounts in red wine. However, we are concerned about alcohol itself. We do no longer believe that alcohol has benefits as we thought. So I would be very cautious in drinking large amounts of wine for longevity benefits, at least with the science that we have today. Maybe tomorrow something else will come out. However, why not get resveratrol from other sources, right? I don't necessarily recommend supplements for that, because some studies show that even though it can be beneficial, other studies show that it can be damaging to our health. So until the science is settled, be very careful taking actual supplements. However, resveratrol, we can find it in grape skin. Why not get it naturally from fruits? So that's why I'm suggesting a wide variety. I don't believe there's just one super molecule for everything. So we want to get all these super molecules, some of that we haven't even discovered, from eating a wide variety of plants, vegetables, and fruits with many different colors, in addition to quality proteins, some grains as well. And for the alcohol for now, I just be extremely cautious and stick with non-alcoholic sources of those.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you. Thank you for touching on that. So let's go back. I mean, you mentioned metformin, but let's go back to tirzepatide and semaglutide. We have a lot of people here right now who are watching, who are on these classes of drugs, and they are interested to know what are the long-term benefits when it comes to longevity specifically. Can you please talk to us about the mechanism of action a little bit? Talk to us about the long-term implications on staying on these drugs. Tell us a little bit more. I mean, we touched on bits and pieces of it, but let's bring it together a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. As far as the mechanism of action is for some, for anybody who's not on any of these medications, we make certain molecules as a response to eating glucose. If we inject glucose in our veins, we're not going to get the response. But if we eat it, it goes into our stomach, our intestines respond, and they produce certain molecules called GLP-1 and GIP. And those go to the pancreas, and they wake up the pancreas and say, okay, we got glucose here. We got to get it out of the bloodstream and into the cells. So the pancreas responds to the GLP-1 and to the GIP and produces insulin under normal circumstances, which is what we want. However, as we develop that insulin resistance, a lot of us cannot have that response anymore. So our body may be making the GIP-1, the GLP-1 or the GIP, or maybe we don't even make those. It's not really clear in diabetes whether they don't make enough of those molecules in the intestine or if their pancreas doesn't respond. It could be both. Definitely the pancreas is not responding. So what do now these medications do? They sort of mimic that action, right? So they are what we call agonists. Let's say the body doesn't make enough of these molecules that we want to stimulate the pancreas to make insulin. If you take semaglutide or tirzepatide, Tirzepatide is a combination. It addresses both of these compounds we just mentioned, and semaglutide is one of them, GLP-1. So what they do, let's say our body doesn't make it, or the pancreas doesn't respond, those molecules that are in these medications, they go and mimic the action of those compounds that our intestines make that are not working for some reason in diabetics or in adults that are obese. So we sort of replace them by giving them externally through the weekly injection. So it's a very simple mechanism of action. It's called an agonist, means it's going and stimulating the same receptor that these molecules would, under healthy circumstances, stimulate the pancreas. However, now, like I think we mentioned earlier, there's a second mechanism through which these medications improve our health, and that's by regenerating the pancreatic cells that have been exhausted and destroyed in long-term diabetics, because the pancreas can only respond so much to medication. That has been my long-term concern when I prescribe diabetes medications, because we ideally have to reverse the diabetes by reversing insulin resistance and inflammation. Otherwise, we're actually doing some damage to the patient. However, it's better to do the damage in 5 years than the patient dying now from not getting treated. So what we're doing when somebody's diabetic, their pancreas doesn't want to produce enough insulin. It can't. So what we do is we give them medications, all these pills they take, and we force the pancreas to the point of exhaustion to just keep pushing out as much as it can, to the point that the cells die off and the patient ends up on insulin. So it's a necessary evil that we have to prescribe the pills that we're prescribing for decades. Now, the good news about semaglutide and tirzepatide, it has a different mechanism of action. Some of it does include stimulating the pancreas. However, it does regenerate at the same time. It regenerates some of the cells in the pancreas. So not only does it offset the problem that other pill-like medications had for many years, but it also reverses the process of having diabetes, which is relatively new information right now. So if we have less diabetes, we're going to have less metabolic syndrome, less insulin resistance, so less damage to our body, so we're going to live longer. Is there another mechanism that it can promote longevity? We don't know yet. But right now, the mechanisms that are established is the reversal of disease, which is a new concept now in medicine, just in the last couple of years. We never talked about reversal of disease before. We talked about patching up things, putting a stent in the heart, trying to get the pancreas to produce more insulin. This concept of disease reversal is new, and I see it every day in my practice now.
So knowing this, is this medication something that you prescribe to your patients for preventative reasons? If someone comes in with a lower BMI, right, it makes sense for patients who are 30, 31 plus in their BMI, but someone who's, in the range of 26, 27, they have a few pounds. So is this something that you would recommend for them?
I think it depends on the history of the patient. Obviously, if the BMI is over, if they're diabetic, absolutely. I see now, we start skipping what we used to prescribe. I mean, we still use metformin, but everything seems so outdated these days. So we go to semaglutide and tirzepatide very, very fast. So it could be even first-line treatment. I see it in some cases. So if somebody's diabetic, yes. If somebody's not diabetic and they have a low BMI, I would not at this point take the risk, because they can develop hypoglycemia, which means low blood sugar. So if they're diabetic, yes. If they're not diabetic, let's say, I don't know if Dr. Sinclair has tried to do that. I haven't heard anything about it, but I would be extremely cautious. If somebody has a continuous glucose monitor, maybe it would be okay to do. And also we have to keep in mind that these medications, they're contraindicated in some individuals, or some individuals don't tolerate them well. So if somebody has a BMI under 25, which is considered normal, and they're not diabetic, I don't even know that we are permitted in a non-experimental setting to do that. If they're over 25, we can talk about that, yes. If their cholesterol is high, they have a high blood pressure, and they have heart disease, then maybe we should. And there's literature specifically that shows that there's heart disease benefits, cardiovascular disease benefits, like you touched upon earlier, reduced strokes, reduced heart attacks from using semaglutide and tirzepatide. This is relatively new information as well. So yes, if a patient is has a lot of risk factors, then yes, I would definitely consider that.
So we have a lot of patients who are reporting to us that their brain fog is going away. You know, things are stabilizing, feel that they're stabilizing within them. Can you talk to us about its effect on hormones and maybe touch on that a little bit? These drugs and their effect on hormones.
These drugs, first of all, when you normalize blood sugar, you're going to have a lot of positive effects. So your insulin is going to normalize, glucagon is going to normalize. Glucagon is a hormone that does the opposite of what insulin does. It actually increases blood glucose. So just insulin will normalize, glucagon will normalize. And then we talked about the fat tissue, especially the one that's around the organs, producing all these abnormal hormones, high levels of estrogen, reducing testosterone. All these things get reversed. Then when you have a lot of inflammation, insulin resistance, that's a stressor on the body. So the body produces high levels of cortisol. It produces high levels of adrenaline or epinephrine. So once you take that factor away and you don't have the inflammation anymore and you don't have the insulin resistance, your cortisol goes down. Your adrenaline starts going down. So it's natural that people will be able to focus better. Mm-hmm. They also going to have more oxygen flow to their brain, more nutrients flowing to their brain because they're the tissues that are, the arterial tissues also get healthier over time. But
it's just a domino effect, right? It starts with one thing and it just keeps going, right?
Yeah. And I think that the something that we're evolving now, traditional medicine, we were doing patchwork. So heart problem, give heart medication. High blood pressure, give this medication. Problems with the joints, we haven't touched up on the joints. All this affects the joints as well, by the way. The inflammation in the joints is tremendous. And by reversing these conditions, we also improve joint health. So all these hormones get normalized. And it's not surprising that, that people start feeling better immediately, but even in the long run, they're going to start feeling even better. And you can even see how they start looking healthier and younger once all this gets reversed. So good looks are a reflection of good health, actually.
That's good to know. I see there was a study published in May in the Journal of Obesity that showed that semaglutide may be able to restore natural killer cells in obese people. These are cells that are important to the immune system and can even attack cancer cells in early stages. It was a small study, but can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. And the immune system is very important for a lot more things than we thought. It's not just for infections. Cancer is huge. And actually, we do see much higher rates of cancer in obese patients. So it is not surprising that by reversing that obesity, right, and reversing the inflammation, we're going to have less cancer, first of all, but an improved immune system. And then the immune system is also going to protect us from cancer in an indirect way as well. So nothing can function well when you have too much sugar in your bloodstream. Everything gets affected. You get those inflammatory effects. You get the AGEs. So by reversing that, you have a normal metabolism. I don't think it really does anything. It just normalizes everything. So these medications, they normalize things. And finally, the cells can function. The natural killer cells can do their job. And when you have a lot of inflammation in the body, which happens when you have high insulin resistance, the immune system is running around. That's what inflammation is. It's an involvement of the immune system. So it's thin, it's spread thin. And when there is a problem that needs to be taken care of, there's not enough soldiers to go there and fight. You got your immune system fighting in the joints, fighting in the heart. So the immune system is not able to do its job when you have insulin resistance and inflammation. And by taking this away through semaglutide and tirzepatide, for example, the immune cells are left alone and they can do their job finally and focus on what they need to do.
Yeah, so you mentioned you lived in Greece and, you've lived on the Mediterranean diet. Can you touch on the role of food and healthy eating? And then also maybe you can share with us, in addition to healthy eating, patients who are on semaglutide and tirzepatide, are there any supplements and vitamins they can benefit from?
Yeah, let's start with the diet first. There've been a lot of diets and diet fads over the years, and then we find out down the line that there's some problems with them. So I would, I'm a little bit biased, I guess, because I'm a Mediterranean, but I think the Mediterranean diet, just joking apart, it gets compared in the medical literature against, let's say, the ketogenic diet, which is really big right now. And it has never been found to be superseded by any other diet. And I'm not surprised by that, because we're designed to eat naturally. We're not designed to not eat any food group at all. I'm talking about natural, real foods, right? So the ketogenic diet, it can be beneficial in some cases, like for children that have seizures where nothing else works. The ketogenic diet was able to help these children. They don't get seizures anymore. So that's a different story. And so apart from that, going to extremes is not necessary. If somebody does go on the ketogenic diet, if they want to lose weight and do it temporarily for a few months and then switch to a Mediterranean diet, is really not a diet per se. It's eating everything. You eat all food groups, but you eat real food. You don't eat packaged foods. You don't eat food that has maybe come from the other side of the world and it's been sitting in the freezer for 6 months. So Mediterranean diet means fresh, lots of vegetables and fruits, some grains, organic if possible, good amount of fish, some beef. So it's focused on vegetables and fruits predominantly, with some amounts of fish and beef and chicken and some grains. So nothing really unusual about it. So we eat dairy, so so far there's been no other diet that has been found to be more effective. And it's actually the easiest quote unquote diet to do. So that's what I would recommend right now. Nobody has to have the word Mediterranean in front of their diet. You don't need to eat feta cheese to do that. You can eat any other cheese that you prefer. Just skip any packaged foods and any foods that have ingredients that are not real foods. You read it and it said, what is this? Is this a food ingredient? No, don't eat it. So it's very simple. Now, regarding supplements, and I just want to go back 1 second on the ketogenic diet. For anybody that does do it, if they do it even temporarily, they have to be very careful. First of all, not to do it in the long run. There was a study recently that showed an increase in mortality for those in the long run. Maybe there'll be another study refuting this, but right now that's what we find. And also, if somebody's on the ketogenic diet, they have to be really careful not to lose muscle mass. So when they do eat enough protein, because we do find that people do lose muscle mass, and that's anti-longevity. In order to have longevity, we need to have sufficient strong bones and strong muscles. That's a major factor. In addition to no inflammation, in addition to reversing diabetes, we need to have strong bone and muscle structure. The other issue with the ketogenic diet is that we lose electrolytes when we're fasting. So we can have heart palpitations, we can have cramps, our body doesn't function well, especially for those that have heart conditions. Have to be extremely careful not to fast for too long, or also with intermittent fasting, that's another thing. So I don't know if you want to touch up on that, but let's get to the supplements. If you eat a really, really well-balanced diet and you eat sufficient calories, you don't necessarily need supplements, but most of us are not able to fulfill the amounts that we need. So the number one vitamin for anyone in particular, for those that are on these medications that are trying to reverse their diabetes and their hypertension, the heart disease, vitamin D3. It's vitamin D, but it's in its active form. That's D3 is crucial. It's not a simple vitamin that just helps with some chemical reactions. Now we believe it's a hormone that is involved in our mood. It can reverse depression. It can help reverse hypertension. It can prevent cancer. It can reverse seasonal depression, bone health. So vitamin D would be the number one, I would say. Another vitamin that's now being talked a lot about, and some doctors are starting to prescribe it, in addition to vitamin D3, is vitamin K2. That's K as in kite, number 2. So that is for to prevent osteoporosis, of course. That's one reason. So vitamin D helps absorb calcium. And then we thought that by giving more calcium, we're going to help women with their That's no longer the case. We don't believe that anymore. Actually, we found that calcium goes into the heart arteries and causes clogged up arteries. It causes damage to the arteries. So K2 has the double benefit. It takes the calcium away from the soft tissues like the heart and the kidneys, where we don't want kidney stones and we don't want heart disease, and it puts it onto the bone. So it's a double benefit. Clearing up the calcium from where we don't want it to be and putting it onto the bone, which is very, very beneficial. And as you know, probably a lot of people lose their life from bone fractures when they're older. So by having strong bones, also if you have strong bones, you're more active in your older years. or even in your middle-aged years, and you live longer that way. So vitamin K2, I would say, is extremely important. Magnesium is another one. Most of us are deficient in magnesium. If you eat the equivalent of about 10 cups of salad or other green vegetables, you're going to get enough magnesium. Otherwise, maybe supplementation would be a good thing, but we have to be very careful to take the kind of magnesium that gets absorbed. Most of it doesn't, and that's why it's used as a laxative by a lot of people. So magnesium glycinate, that's GlyCinate, glycinate, is one that gets absorbed. And all vitamins are important. I just want to touch up on vitamin A. Some people are overdosing on vitamin A. I had a patient the other day. He was taking, I said, why are you taking this vitamin A, like in very large amounts? Oh, I just thought it's beneficial. And then he also happened to be taking cod liver oil, and he didn't know the cod liver oil is very, very much loaded with vitamin A. It can cause liver damage. So taking a multivitamin could be helpful, making sure you get enough vitamin D3, K2, magnesium. I would like to caution against taking huge amounts of vitamin E or other antioxidants, because in the 90s, we used to give them to reverse heart disease, and we found that they cause more cancer and more heart disease. So our body needs to have a balance between oxidants and antioxidants. So some damage the body uses to heal, and then whatever our food provides, the body will take the appropriate amounts. But if we bombard it with too many vitamins, that's not going to be helpful. Another thing now for longevity specifically, there's new supplements out there like NMN. So that's something that's converted into a substance called NAD that's very important for our mitochondria, our energy factories and our cells, to be very, very productive. So some people that take NMN see huge improvements in their health. For others, they have difficulty sleeping. So the science is still evolving, and there's a lot of research. A lot of people that are very much into longevity, they do take NMN. I don't necessarily say that somebody should take them right now. Personally, I'm waiting for the research to come out. But this is like in the next few years, the next 5 years, we're going to learn a lot more about these supplements. Other supplements are creatine, glycine. Glycine is very, very good for longevity and for reversing all these processes we talked about. But then I have not seen a study on that, but I know that cancer cells like to eat glycine. So I'm not taking it. So a lot of other people do take it. Is this going to cause damage? I don't know. There's no evidence. So I would stick for now with supplements that are already well established, like the ones we talked about, and be on the lookout for all those that are going to give us a push for longevity and maybe rapid disease reversal even faster. Even though with the semaglutide that I see right now and the tirzepatide, I see dramatic improvements in the last few months that I've been working with them extensively.
So we touched on a lot of the benefits of tirzepatide and semaglutide, but I did receive a question about gastroparesis, and it's been, there's been a lot of news articles that have come out, and there was a recent lawsuit against the manufacturer of Wegovy. Can you talk to us about gastroparesis? I think the danger is really, it's permanent. Can you talk to us about the permanent possibility of gastroparesis? First of all, what is gastroparesis? And then the short-term versus long-term, and maybe you could touch on that a little bit. There was a question that came in.
Paresis just means a weakening muscle function. So it's not completely paralyzed, but paresis means that the stomach, gastroparesis means the stomach is not contracting as it should, and it's not pushing the food forward as fast or as intensely as it should. So I should add to the mechanism of action. We talked about the most important mechanism of action of these medications. They go to the pancreas and they stimulate the pancreas to produce insulin and also regenerate cells. But there's other mechanisms. One of them is to prevent the liver from producing sugar, pushing sugar into the bloodstream. And another one is this gastroparesis. So for some people, it may be a negative side effect, but for some is what's actually helping them curb their appetite and prevent the sugar spike. So it is an effect that for some, if it's very intense, it can make the food pool there. That's going to be good for their weight loss and for the insulin resistance reversal. But if it's very uncomfortable, that they feel extreme bloating or they start vomiting, then it's a negative side effect, but it's still going to help them accomplish their goals of weight loss and reversing the insulin resistance. So if somebody has excessive gastrointestinal stomach problems, maybe they should get off these medications. But for most people, they're milder. And it's just part of how the medication affects the stomach in a desirable way. This is one of the things that we do want, actually. And I think the lawsuit was about that the patient was not cautioned that this was a potential side effect. So patients should be cautioned very thoroughly that this is a possible side effect. I think it's usually in the single digits. So if a lot of patients go on these medications, there's going to be a lot of people eventually that are going to experience that. And it'll depend how tolerable that is. Now, the good news is in many cases, when we start with the lowest dose and we titrate, we increase it gradually, these side effects subside. Now, typically gastroparesis is not permanent. So because you asked it earlier, I have not heard of it being permanent. The only cases where there's intestinal issues like that, unrelated to these medications, is in very, very old people. And I'm not talking about now diabetes or Ozempic or anything like that. I've never heard of anybody having gastroparesis that didn't get reversed. And it's a typical complication of diabetes itself, by the way. So it's not something that's just caused by these medications, but the medications will slow down the action of the stomach, which is something that we want. So it's up to the patient with their doctor to determine what their risk is and whether they want to take that risk.
Well, thank you, Antanja. And I want to take one more question. I want to be mindful of your time. We're approaching the time, but can you touch on intermittent fasting? What is the best time frame? Is it an 8-hour rule? 16 hours? What do you think about intermittent fasting?
I do like intermittent fasting, at least in the short term. Now, again, there's studies coming out that prolonged intermittent fasting has the same effects we were talking about earlier about losing muscle mass, as well as losing those electrolytes that we should be sure to replace. I do like intermittent fasting because it does jumpstart metabolism. So somebody that's trying to lose weight, I think it's a great way to get started. And it's not clear whether the fasting itself causes those benefits, even though there are benefits for longevity I'm going to touch upon in a second, but in terms of weight loss, or whether it's calorie restriction, because if you only eat in an 8-hour window and don't eat for 16 hours, you're going to end up eating less. So that's not clear whether it's calorie restriction or the fasting itself that causes the weight loss. Most people, I think they start maybe with a 12-hour window, or maybe eating for 14 hours. And they start eating for 14 and fast for 10. And then you definitely need to go lower. You need to be able to fast for 12 hours and eat for 12 hours, and ideally a 16-8. Fasting for 16 and eat for 8. This is the most commonly used one. There are people that go on long fast for various medical conditions. They say they find benefits. I would be careful to do that. Not everybody can tolerate it. And then you're going to lose those electrolytes. And you want to have sufficient sodium, magnesium, calcium, potassium, especially with heart conditions and with diabetes, because in these conditions, we already low in magnesium. Diabetics already have issues with their potassium. We have to be very, very careful. Also, if somebody has kidney issues. But if their doctor says that it's okay to not eat for 16 hours and eat for 8 hours, this is the preferred window. Also, the frequency of eating matters. Usually, it's best to eat fewer meals. 2 meals is better, because if you keep eating multiple meals, even within this 8-hour window, the insulin and the sugar will keep spiking, promoting that insulin resistance and inflammation. Now, I just want to add to that one of the benefits of fasting itself, whether it's intermittent or otherwise, it promotes autophagy. We talked earlier about the cell repairs and the protein cleaning, house cleaning. There's many, Hormesis is one way, like the cold showers and the sauna, but another way is fasting. And there's many other things also, like eating olive oil and eating berries and drinking green tea and avoiding all those inflammatory oils. So there's many things that can stimulate the autophagy, and intermittent fasting can do that. I would be very careful though, if I'm a diabetic, and especially if I'm on insulin, because the program, the whole schedule of medication that the doctor has put the patient on, that they struggled over time to find a nice balance, If the patient suddenly stops eating for 16 hours, that's all going to get thrown off. And I would be extremely careful if somebody's on insulin. I don't want them to become hypoglycemic and drop their blood sugar to dangerous levels. So if somebody has diabetes or they are already on Ozempic or any of these similar drugs, be very careful with fasting. Check with your doctor. It could be adjusted. The eating and treatment schedule can be coordinated, but do not do it on your own. Whether you're diabetic or if you're taking it for weight loss, you're taking Ozempic or Wegovy or Tirzepatide, Qyral, don't just do that on your own.
Well, Dr. Braimakis, we've approached our time and I'm just so excited. I didn't even ask you half of my questions, but all that means is you're coming back very soon so we could talk even more. I mean, gosh, this is so exciting and so fascinating. And we just started talking about some of these longevity benefits and what the future of longevity looks like. But I would love to have you back. Thank you so much.
It would be a pleasure. Thank you. And the science is evolving very rapidly. There's always new things to discuss. Even within a few days, there's new things that come up, and it'd be a pleasure to be back. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Then thank you all for joining us. Please join us again next week for another training session. Thank you so much, Dr. Braimakis. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye-bye now.